ahead and get started. Good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on what part of the continent you're in. Thank you for another round of NIRSA Ideas in Motion, the virtual roundtables that have been going on across our association, which have been wonderful. As you see, there's a poll that's popped up. Feel free to go ahead and answer those because that was framed the session today and seeing where all institutions are at and where we can go from there. This is the one that's regarding assessment roundtable. So we're going to talk about, different things regarding assessment, whether it's virtual programming or things to look for, whether in the fall or the spring, or it could be both. So for introductions, my name is Chris Washington. I am the coordinator of student development and engagement at University of North Carolina at Charlotte. So go Niners. I do a lot with a lot of our development of our training for our programs and services, but I work a lot with our strategic planning and assessment of our office and working with our constituents there. But it's just not me today. I brought in some other members in regards to the NIRSA Research Assessment Committee. So I'll turn it over to them for introductions, starting with either Jason.
I guess I'll start since my name is top there. My name is Jason Miller. I'm the Assistant Director for Campus Recreation at the University of Pittsburgh. This will be my third year on the Research and Assessment Committee, and for 2021, I'll be serving as the committee chair.
Hey, I'm Jason Vlastaras with Iowa State University, where I serve as the Associate Director for Programs and Student Success, and so I was the outgoing chair for the Research and Assessment Committee this year, or last year, I should say.
And I'm Ruben Guzman. I'm the liaison for the Research and Assessment Committee.
Thank you guys. Thank y'all for your time and helping with this roundtable today. So, we have a lot of things going on in terms of assessment that we'd like to talk about. But I wanted to kind of open up, first of all, for general reminders and guidelines. Of course, this session, like all of the Ideas in Motion, will be recorded. It's being recorded currently and posted on the NIRSA website. Just make sure you guys are muted if you're not speaking, in terms of the discussion, if you want to get some ideas. Of course, that chat box is available to ask questions or to provide some conversations to get started. And then, of course, we welcome all ideas and suggestions and things of that nature. For me, assessment is not everybody's an assessment guru or master. And I just speak for me. I consider myself an assessment pioneer. And it could be different for each person that's speaking today. So we welcome all ideas and suggestions to help, further advance our association in each of our different offices towards assessment and success for our students. So I wanted to turn over first quick to Jason Miller for some updates that he has from the Research and Assessment Committee. If you want to take it away.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so just a couple quick updates. The 2021 R&A Committee, we kicked off our work a couple weeks ago, and we've already kind of dove into things. We've got the NIRSA Research Grant application period that's currently open. That closes June 30th. As soon as all of those applications come through, we'll be reviewing those for throughout the month of July, and we'll be submitting our recommendations for awards in very early August. So to talk about some of the work that the committee is going to be jumping into this coming year, there's two main areas that we're going to be focusing on. The first one is kind of a familiar area to this committee. This is the Value of Campus Recreation project. Many of you might be aware of the graphics that have been sent out over the past few weeks. And we broke that up in different categories, showcasing the value of campus recreation, and it was supported by research, which is a pretty cool tool to have. We had a fair amount of positive response to that project and to those deliverables. So we're going to continue that work for this next year, and really kind of do the exact same thing that we did this past year and find more research that backs the value of rec following those categories that we had initially created. The next area that we're working to focus on is not specifically defined yet, but we do know generally what realm we want it to be within, and that's going to be within the realm of intramurals or club sports, and specifically from the assessment standpoint. Now, we don't know exactly what that's going to look like just yet. We're talking about that as a committee internally, and also, we're open to any ideas that that the membership would have for some sort of assessment project or assessment tool for intramurals or club sports, possibly even hoping to get some thoughts from this roundtable today. One of the things that did come up in our discussion when we kicked off our committee meeting a couple weeks ago was the whole notion of virtual programming. Obviously, with COVID-19, almost every institution and campus recreation department has done something in form of virtual programming and engagement. And rightfully so, there's probably some level of assessment that comes with that. So there might be an opportunity for us to kind of capture all of the work that people have been doing given the circumstances, and maybe we can help that out in coming up with some sort of a assessment or project or tool that helps those efforts out. And then some other ideas that kind of popped up as we were throwing things around was just new or emerging activities or sports. So for example, eSports, which everyone knows that's just kind of exploding in popularity right now. Does it make sense for us to focus on a specific activity or sport that is growing and emerging for our membership to rely on? So again, that whole project on assessment of intramurals and club sports isn't clearly defined yet, and we're open to ideas and suggestions from the membership. But nonetheless, we wanted to give an update on where our committee is heading into work for this next year.
Sounds excellent. Yeah, feel free to reach out to either Jason's and especially anyone in that committee. So thanks a lot, Jason. Absolutely. So just wanted to give you guys just an overview of our topics of discussion, which has been submitted to us. We're either on the NIRSA community page or by email. So of course, the assessment of virtual programming, as we know, that we are in unprecedented times with COVID-19 and having to be offline or not in operation. And so you've seen across across the continent, of course, different virtual programs or different ways to engage students. We talk about, there's a discussion on creative ways of using assessment to improve and adapt. And so, of course, different institutions are using ways to continuously provide more proof of or more of that storytelling on why assessment is important, but also finding ways and more tools to use that assessment to further along with their departments. We got a topic on types of assessment schools will be looking at. Because, so of course, some schools are, of course, transitioning more back into normalcy in the fall, but there's some schools that have already decided to be fully online or doing a hybrid form. I know our schools is looking to that possibly and potentially, but that's up to them. So just probably an open discussion on that. We got one on recruitment of populations. That's something that's been overview and discussed before, across different associations and colleagues in higher education. So that's something that we get to that. And then tracking participants from year one in matriculation, which is more of a research, but if anyone has any ideas regarding that, when we get to that topic, that's fine. So these are the topics of the discussion. We may not get to all of them, but we can get to what we have today. And then if there's opportunities to do a part two, we can get to that. So the first one, again, of course, is assessment of virtual programming. And we could post a poll results. So as we see that, there's some people that are doing none, but most of the people are doing somewhat assessment. And there's a few people that are doing a lot of assessment. So thank you all for responding. But what I want to get to is, first of all, and I kind of centralized it for facilitation today, is what type of assessment you're doing in virtual programming and why are you doing assessment in virtual programming. So I wanted to turn it over to either Jason's on, their ideas, and then definitely open up the discussion to everyone else. So if y'all wanted to start with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in as we talk about moving things to virtual programming and asking to, what is the impact? What is the effect? How are we measuring, one, engagement, and then two, potentially learning or development from that virtual programming? So I think we got so busy, especially here at Iowa State, just getting everything online from a programming standpoint. It's now settling down and getting us to a place where we can start asking those questions about determining effectiveness. And here locally, we were asked early to really measure engagement as a justification for holding on to our spring fees. So we had to do a really rushed job of really just participation assessment and getting creative with website hits and social media interactions and participation in our virtual programming to what ended up resulting in us being able to hold on to those fees. So as we talk about assessment, I'm kind of talking about it in two different ways. I always tell my staff here that from an assessment standpoint, assessment responds to two forces. So one being the need to internally evaluate the effectiveness of what we do and evaluate our programs. And the second need being to externally justify what we do to various stakeholders. So right now, I feel like we're kind of in a place of having to do a lot more of that second piece of reaching out to various stakeholders and showing our impact just from a survival standpoint. But now I'm interested in us transitioning to how can we internally look at some of these things that we're doing from a programming standpoint and measure learning engagement and effectiveness. So that's where I want to leave it to the group and get some discussion going on. And Jason or Ruben, feel free to jump in with some perspective as well. What people are doing as some creative examples of measuring or assessing or evaluating their online virtual programming at this point.
Does anyone want to speak on it, or anybody have any?
Feel free to put some things in the chat. Maybe that's a good place to start, and we can kind of pick from the chat some good examples and ask some people to maybe share a little bit more specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. Please use the chat function.
And while people are either using the chat or thinking about what to say, I'll kind of provide a real basic example at Pitt where we do basic assessment of our intramural participation, our group exercise numbers, our facility visits, the basic metrics that most people cover. But since social distancing, we've focused a lot more on our digital metrics, specifically social media and website. And, one of the things that we've been able to do, and this is just through a student worker that's kind of helps us manage our social. He has access to our Google Analytics account. He has access to our newsletter, which we use MailChimp for. And obviously he manages all of our social media. So we've gotten to the point where he's producing a weekly report, which is just an Excel document, and he's plugging in different numbers such as number of followers, what campaigns did we send out, and more importantly, what type of engagement did we get through those various campaigns. And that really helps us have some sort of a gauge on that marketing campaign or that initiative that we put out and whether or not it was well received by the students. So it's nice to have, for someone that kind of oversees all those areas, it's nice for me to kind of get that report on a weekly basis, and I can just open it up real quick and I can see with a snapshot of how our different, different accounts are performing.
So real quick, I was going to see if Anaja would mind sharing the mixture of looking at qualitative assessment and then adding in the quantitative. I think that's an important piece and an interesting piece, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Absolutely. So at University of South Florida, I'm a quantitative person by nature. And so I was a little bit out of my comfort zone, but we found that being able to engage students in dialogue was a lot more meaningful to our administrators. And then going back later, like weeks later, to support what the students were saying about their engagement with some of our social media analytics, some of the quantitative data that we got from our big virtual 5K race, which we saw 33% of our participation in that race were non-users of our facility that never been into our facility. So we were able to really leverage qualitative data and then go back and support the quantitative data, which was a little bit out of my comfort zone, but definitely beneficial for us.
Yeah, that's great information here. I mean, one of the things that for us is becoming more important is to understand our student population and which to engage and being flexible in towards what their engagement is in and adapting to it. We've actually seen webinars actually corresponds to that and into how we create that sense of belonging and how do we assess that sense of belonging with our institution. So that's excellent. Do we have anyone else that's mind quite sharing?
There's a few good ones I want to get to here. Matt from UC Riverside. I'd be curious on that. We just ran an assessment around our esports participants who haven't participated in anything outside of our eSport intramurals to see what other offerings they would like. That brought some really good information for us. So we're not just keep offering the same esports tournaments over and over again. But I'd be curious on that. And then also Mark's question on translating social media engagements to actual behavior change in students. Phenomenal question. Not something that we are doing currently, but I would really like to know if anybody is. So if any of those individuals want to kind of talk about that.
Yeah, Jason, I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing here at UC Riverside. But first, the two Jasons, great mustaches. I want to give y'all kudos for that. So what we're doing here at UC Riverside, we're on the quarter system. So we're actually coming up into our playoffs. And then next week we'll have our championship week with all of our eSport games. So what we did is that we launched actually a survey, not just to the people that participated, but our entire population of students that participated the entire year, just to see why they didn't or why they did participate in our e-games this year, just to kind of figure out what we can offer. One of the things that we have at Cross is the first-person shooter games, as well as like UFC. And then those are the biggest hurdles that we are looking at because we see that some schools have huge numbers. Here at our university, we don't actually have our own social media platform. So we have like a one band, one sound type of social media approach where all of our information comes out through our UCR SRC kind of marketing campaign. So it makes it a little bit difficult for us to kind of make sure that all of our information is going out, especially when the transition of COVID hit. Everyone was flocking to social media to kind of put everything out. And so what we ended up doing was we kind of laid off a little bit on putting out Twitter, Instagram posts, and instead we used IM League to kind of engage our students, send out emails to them to kind of ask them what they did. We also did town halls, and then in the town hall meetings, they're similar to captain's meetings. We just kind of posted them and then actually did poll results where people could actually put things and ask questions. And so we use the group chat function to kind of get feedback. Kind of what Aunt Angela was saying from South Florida was about talking about quantitative and qualitative. We want to kind of get the meat before we start looking at those numbers. And so now with the survey that we have, we're going to be ending it next Friday. And so these are going to be the more of kind of like, I guess, the justifying of electronic games or e-games going on beyond this point and going year round. Because prior to this, I think that we're probably one of the many universities that didn't have a lot of e-games. We had tournaments, and then we kind of flipped the switch and went all leagues and stuff like that. So it was very beneficial, and so far has been beneficial to kind of see in about 2 hours. We launched the survey actually just yesterday. In about 2 hours, we had 150 responses. So I haven't actually looked at it this morning, but we're just hoping to kind of get those things rolling, so that way to get more information from everyone and kind of push the envelope a little bit more in the summer, and then kind of see what other universities are doing in the semesters, and then when we come back in the quarter, kind of have a better plan of action.
Awesome, thanks, Matt. Anaja, would you mind speaking on that a little bit? Social media engagement translated to behavior change? That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, so not to kind of lower expectations a little bit, I'm not going to give anything profound. But what I will say is that you'll have to go back to, and this is specifically to, I think, Trey and Mark, who originally asked the question, you'll have to go back to your purpose of assessment to answer that question. And for us, and I'm directly responsible for the assessment in our department, our purpose of assessment right now is engagement, not behavior change. And for us and our administration, and when we're looking at student fees and making some larger decisions, unfortunately, our administration is not really concerned right now with actual behavior change. And so when you look at the why you're doing the assessment, we were really pushed to look at how we were engaging students. And so sometimes those superficial analytics really sold the narrative to our administrators. So I would start there and really decide what's going to be important for your assessment right now. We've had to put program effectiveness and behavior change on the back burner a little bit. But there were also ways that we were able to ask very pointed questions about behavior change. And I kind of alluded to that in what we did with our virtual 5K. We specifically asked students, before this 5K virtual program, had you ever participated in a recreation program before? And 33% of those students said no. Even more of those students said that they had participated in recreation programs or visited the facility less than once a month. So we were able to show correlational behavior change, but not necessarily causation. And for us, in this particular point in time, that was good enough.
Yeah, that's great. Excellent news. I think it seems that we might be seeing a trend across the nation with that, where our students, we can tell that our students are not as involved, but maybe never even heard of what programs or services we may offer. And one of the telling things is, which is probably important for qualitative information, is figuring out the why, and providing more context on why they're not involved, and providing more context on how we can get them involved, make them more comfortable to participate in the rec center. So we want to move on. So we want to have really not a lot of time. We only have an hour, but wanted to get to the second one, where it's creative ways of using assessment to improve and adapt. And for us, that is attuned to assessment. There's many different ways, but from a simple survey of using campus labs, but different approaches and steps to ask one question versus another question, or as you said, Anya, where we might figure out why we're doing assessment. So I wanted to put it out there for, as a discussion question that we got, what type of ways are you using assessment to improve and adapt? And you can feel free to use the chat function as available, as is when it's ready.
I guess I'll go throw a quick example in here for us. Starting off with trying to build a culture of assessment, the low-hanging fruit for us as student employees. So one of the things we've tried to do creatively is really around this idea of career readiness and the transferable skills that our student employees are developing. So the creation of a structure of kind of 8 big career readiness competencies that we want our students to understand from their employment or to gain from their employment. So creating some assessment around those 8 competencies has been a big thing for us to evaluate the student employment experience and where students are perceiving a higher level of development. So we do a before and after all-in-one collective survey, and we pull out that data that has some qualitative pieces to it and some quantitative to kind of tell that story of student employment, which has, I think, from an improvement standpoint, create a much richer experience for our student employees to really start understanding, that their jobs they're gaining a lot more from this on-campus employment experience than just a paycheck. So that's one creative thing I think we've done just to kind of get the conversation started. So let's see if there's anything else in the chat.
I have a question for you, Jason. Has that turned into learning outcomes that you guys have established, or maybe something across the division that you guys established?
Great question. So the genesis of how this has then evolved has now become a division-wide effort for all of student affairs to use. And we've gone from a very simple, how do you feel about your development in these skills, to actually creating learning outcomes and behavioral expectations, behavioral questions for a true pre and post survey. So it's evolved from something pretty just rudimentary to now having 8 competencies that have learning outcomes attached to them as well, which has been great and is now being adopted across the division. So yeah, that was I think that kind of right with the learning outcomes piece.
Yep.
Leslie, I can definitely share those as well somehow. Actually, I'll send a link in the chat. So let's see, adapt sport club programming based on assessment of student interests and proposed activities.
Yeah, the 8 competencies. The 8 competencies that I'm familiar with, Leslie, for your question, mainly is from NACE that we use at UNC Charlotte. So it's critical thinking, communication, leadership, teamwork. I believe we have global intercultural awareness, as well as self-awareness as well. I think I'm missing 1 or 2, but for us, we have adapted it. I've kind of with our department kind of combined a couple of them in terms of defining global, and not only global awareness, but self-awareness into one for equity and understanding yourself as well as others that are around you and that you work with. But I think I'm missing a couple of the other ones as well. But those are, you can look it up on the NACE website.
Yep.
That our Career Center uses them. It's becoming kind of a common trend that has spurred upon on what soft skills or skills that they need to focus on for the students going through college.
So Mark, I'd ask to see if you would mind sharing. I think that's a really cool example of an evolution of going from just simple satisfaction to actually talking about outcomes and sense of belonging and behavior change, which we see as a big, factor for persistence and graduation. So.
Yeah, sure. I can talk a little bit about that. As that's kind of the big question as we're looking towards, concepts of retention and recruitment and that belonging to not only the department, but to their peers. And we see that with clubs and that. But, when we think of our, assessments, we often put out satisfaction surveys. Did you, I'll use intramurals as an example. Did you get enough games? Do you like the times? We're very transactional and structured focused rather than asking, by participating in intramurals, do you feel more connected to the student body as a whole, to the rec department, to you? And those are the sorts of questions that we're not seeing a lot of yet. When we think of even events, I'll use a kind of a community event oriented. Our family will go to a community event held on by the community center. It'll be, we'll say Easter. Then it's an Easter egg hunt for the kids and all that. We go, we have a good time, but in no way do we feel more connected to our community because of that event. It's just actually something to do on a Saturday afternoon because it's there from 1 to 3. It was free. It's something to do. We're actually really not connecting with our neighbors. We're doing the activities in isolation because that's actually how they are being organized. And then when they assess it, they go, hey, did you like that? And if the outcome was, well, did I like the activity? Then yes, then great, success. But oftentimes that's not. That, if you were to talk to them at a more deeper level, that organization will talk about, we want to build neighbors and a community sense, but that outcome wasn't measured, nor was it, asked of us. And so taking that into fitness programs, aquatics programs, when we start assessing and asking those on a regular basis about, there's some students that really get sport and rec. They go, I go to work out. I don't need to be around people. I don't need to feel connected to community, and that's okay. But I don't feel like we're not actually measuring that in a meaningful way and collecting that, especially when it comes to the higher purpose when we start asking about the value of campus recreation on those aspects and looking at some of those. And I think a lot of that comes to that qualitative. We all have that story of a student that said, if I didn't find the rec center, I might have failed out. I feel really connected. But that's one story that we often tack on an assessment report at the end, rather than we should have some of that hardcore data that says numbers. When we talk about participant rates too, is how many of those are participants that participate in 3 or 4 different activities, and we're counting them multiple times, rather than those unique participation rates that I only participate in this one part and this activity. And so, unique participation rates is much different than overall headcount numbers. And so how do we move away from headcounts, which, and I can totally appreciate where people are talking about the idea that, well, that's what upper administration wants to hear. And it kind of feels to me, it's kind of backwater and going against the grain, because they're saying, well, focus on this, so we'll do that to prove that we exist, but then we're moving away from our true purpose and then not collecting that data that's going to help us to be sustainable down the future.
It's a balance. Such a great point, and really well put. Ali's point here about, is anyone tracking and watching frequency of exercise swipes to see the percentage? I know one thing we do is we track participation across multiple program areas and facilities and assign point values and tie that to retention and GPA. So, make of those results what you will. If people participate in multiple areas, they have a higher GPA, we leave that up to whoever wants to interpret that. But it's still a fun little report that we run every year as well. So anybody else with similar thoughts on that or has experience?
Jason, Dan Gardner at William & Mary, I have one if it's possible.
Yeah.
So in response to Ali's question about looking at adherence to exercise guidelines, when I worked at George Washington University, we did a study with our university's assessment and evaluation group and student affairs. We tracked the number of swipes in a semester and in an academic year by student ID number. And then we generated to what degree those every individual swipes to the rec center met guidelines for physical activity through a couple different ways. And then part 2 of that survey was part 2 of that project was to send a survey to people who swept into the rec center to ask them on average weekly or on average monthly, how much time did they spend exercising outside of our facility and doing other things. And so we incorporated what they did outside of the rec center into the degree to which they met guidelines for physical activity. And we found out that our campus, students on our campus did not meet guidelines for physical activity as much as we'd like. And that we didn't get IRB approval for that. That was for internal reporting only. So that wasn't published anywhere. But the GW's assessment team and student affairs helped us do that.
Hi, Ali. I'll add to that. We did something a little similar at USF. This was maybe 2 years ago, and it was also not an IRB approved study, but we took a sample of group fitness participants and compared it to a group of just the student population. And we compared students that met exercise guidelines with the amount of perceived stress. And we were able to show, and we categorized it as high usage, moderate usage, and low usage. And we were able to show that students that attended 10 or more group fitness classes in a semester, we categorized them as moderate. And that 10 per semester, which is about once a week for us, correlated to lower levels of perceived stress at significantly lower values than the reported student population on the ACHA, NCHA data. So we were able to use that, and then we were able to take that information and start our marketing plan and incentive programs, encouraging people to attend 10 or more classes per semester to improve the number of students reaching that kind of threshold. So that's something similar, but not exactly what you're asking.
These are all great points. Excellent. Anybody else wants to, before we move on, speak on this topic? See, there's been a lot of good things going on in the chat. This is great discussion.
This is Ali. If I can just mention, we were running, we did it for the fall semester in 2015, and then we just redid the same study in 2019, looking at all the swipes into the facility, and we included all the facilities that we manage. And then we were looking at how many students fell into, and we defined a no activity, a low, light, medium, and high. And we were pretty generous with those categories to try to see if, high, we put all the way from three to 7 days a week, really, or 3.5, I think. And we were really surprised by, and the GPA data that corresponded to that was pretty convincing that if people were in the moderate or high category, it was a significant difference. It was very convincing. Plus, there's tons of research about how important exercise is for health and mental health, not only just academic performance. So that's a great example. But I was so surprised at the percentage of our students that use it at that category. And I don't feel like we often share that because it's not the story we want to tell. We have a ton of students that come in, but not necessarily at the frequency that they're going to see these same benefits of exercise. So I would love to be able to share. So both of the two examples that were shared were really helpful, and I'd love to connect.
Allie, a question for you and others kind of related to that area. Were you, when you collect that data, is that identified data where you can pinpoint exactly which student that was, or what metrics
Yes.
did you use? Okay.
Yeah. And we also,
then, how did you navigate that? And this is kind of a question for the entire group, I think, for their benefit, is how did you navigate that through the university system in terms of getting access to the individual student data versus, some saying we're de-identifying our data and we're not opening that up for student privacy purposes?
Yeah, so when we get the student import of all the data that dumps into Fusion from Banner, we get the student ID, student name. We also get whether they live on or off campus, what classification they are, so their year at the institution, ethnicity, GPA. So we have all of this data that's in Fusion. It's in our own system. So we can run all these reports ourselves without having to ask institutional research every time, which is new. We used to have to go through institutional research, but an IR would do all of that and then send us back results that are de-identified. But we're able to do it ourselves in-house with our own staff. And then and so it's given us the ability to be able to do this more often and every semester. So the other thing that I thought was interesting was, out of all the students, so we have all the students in Fusion, then we also have the people who have actually swiped in and used it. So we're able to look at a non-activity group because they're still in Fusion. And then we can see the activities and the frequency of swipes for everybody that has been using it. And then I can run, based off of the program registration, how many overall students have been at least in a program that we offer. And so I think we're hovering around like 45% of all students have enrolled in some program. And so it gives me some goals to be able to say that's where really the learning outcomes can happen, is in the programs, because that's where we can influence behavior change better than just them coming in and using the spaces at their own leisure, which is still great, but we really want to drive some program engagement. So so at that point we can set some goals to say, I'd love to see it at 47% or 50% or, that kind of thing. And then we just have to be able to track attendance at everything, even events, so we can clump all that engagement into one solid number.
It's excellent. Yeah, that's great. We can leave it on that. So we can move into the next topic, which, there we go, which I think be more interesting to see. Of course, like I said, types of assessment schools will be looking at in the fall. We know some schools have already moved to fully online, just to not take that chance. And then there's some schools that are potentially looking at a hybrid formation where, they may become students come to class maybe once or twice, and then they are online for the rest of the week. So I'll be interested to see, for those who institutions are already decided on what format they're taking, what type of assessment you guys would be doing in regards, because, for my institution, we don't have a decision yet. So we can leave it open for that. Anybody have anything to add with that? Does anyone have it, or does it seem the possibility that everyone's everyone still don't know where they're at, where their institution's at? Is that a possibility?
I don't know if this will help or an example, and this is local to us, but along with Summer Alley's example of this higher level, looking at participation in the rec facilities and tying it to GPA and retention. One thing we're doing with our satisfaction surveys is having participants start to self-identify which dimensions of wellness they find that activity helped or benefited. So this is a way that we're trying to tell a story around kind of that chip on our shoulder about everybody else kind of thinking we just are only involved in the physical dimension of wellness. And I'm just stereotyping at this point of what the rest of campus might think about us. But we want to be able to tell that story a little bit more internally of, 80% of our, we ascribe to the 8 dimensions of wellness here. So I think it's, yeah. So we have, 95% of group fitness participants said that taking group fitness classes affected the physical dimension of wellness for them, but also then, 80% said it affected their social wellness as well, or their emotional wellness. So we want to be able to tell that story by program and then also larger by total participation, and to be able to share that out. And so we're basically taking assessment that's already being done across all of our different programs and adding that identifier question within it. So it's not much of a big lift within each of the surveys that already are going out by each program.
Yeah, we have a very similar initiative in place at Pitt where it's not necessarily developed around the 8 dimensions of wellness. It's more of, it's called the outside classroom curriculum, OCC. So it's this whole concept of, and once the students complete it, there's basically a curriculum that you have to go through, and you self-report the different areas. So for example, if you participate in a club sport, you can go into this software program and you can identify that you participated in club sports, and it gives you, X number of points toward that wellness goal area. But then it covers a lot of other spaces as well. So, career prep, leadership, most of those identifiers do relate to the dimensions of wellness, but it's a little bit broader than that. And they've even expanded it so much to where if you finish that OCC curriculum by graduation, they give you a cord that you get to wear, whenever you go through. So I can, for Jason or for the group, I can share information on that. And that's a student affairs initiative that is really interesting because any student can participate in the OCC. And it's, again, not really around this dimensions of wellness, but, total student learning. And it's been going on for 5 years or so now.
Yeah, it's good information, Jason. All right. Since we don't really have any information with this part, and I can understand that we don't know what's going to happen, schools are definitely continuing to look towards decision making and what they're going to do. So I can definitely respect that and move along with our conversation. So this is an interesting one: recruitment of population that influences programming. So this is, focusing on what types of assessments, institutions, of course, our offices are looking at, or what type of populations or what type of methods you guys are using to recruit potential students to come to maybe possibly not only the institution, but at UREC. So I'll open up the floor or the topic in regards to that on, how are different people, what type of assessment or methods, methodologies you are using in regards to this topic. Yeah, go ahead, Mark, if you have anything.
Yeah, so mine's probably kind of even a very focused population. So I was at Mount Royal University, which had a very indigenization strategic plan at the institutional level. And so one of the things we did was work with the Indigenous Student Center, specifically around youth in the community, that they had youth programs that they would try to get the youth to come to the university in the essence that if they came and felt comfortable in the facilities and in the classrooms, that they would be more likely to be recruited to the institution. And so, we kind of worked hand in hand and collaborated with them by giving free passes and, even changing some of our policies with regards to allowing the youth to come into our facilities, having some facilitators work with their facilitators. And it wasn't a major commitment, but we saw, the impact it had on that sense of belonging that these potentially incoming students would have. And so, my advice to anyone who's working with any sort of population is in that power of collaboration. And that's, whether that's eSports or a marginalized group or veterans or, it's working with those resources on campus and not just kind of saying, well, here's what we have, because oftentimes we don't program, we program at instead of more of with. And I think that's kind of a facilitation that needs to be had of getting those involved that are potential recruitments to them to understand what they're looking for. And especially, when we look at behavior changes from high school to institution, to university and college, that's a huge change where oftentimes we don't know whether things and programs are changing or there's new programs there. So oftentimes when we think about trends, we shouldn't be thinking about the societal fitness trends. We should be thinking about that transitioning trend. So what are those students learning in high school? What are those trends there so that we can work with them to facilitate potentially new programming ideas?
Yeah, that's great information. Does anybody have anything to contribute or anything to add to that, or another method?
I guess I'll just jump in. When we're talking about some of these larger participation surveys and collecting this big data from all of our participation. And I think once we do that, the big thing we also need to do is really start disaggregating all of that data and pulling it apart and looking specifically at those populations or underrepresented groups and participation. And that's what assessment is really for, is to bring up questions, right? So what questions does that bring up? For us, when we look at participation across all those things, then we start identifying student groups and say, well, how can we reach out to this group or that group? And then we drill down even further and kind of looking back at some of the needs assessments or things we've sent out. The eSports example is a good one of, okay, now we're going to survey the population on campus who's not using our services and who would like to, and that survey that we sent out to the campus population around eSports was a big driver for us to actually build that program, which made it very student-led from the beginning. So again, taking all that high-level data, I think we really then need to break it down and look at that and see what questions that then brings up. So that's just a quick point.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, especially with regards to, collaborating with those resources on campus, because, oftentimes if they're not engaged with us, they don't feel like they belong in rec. So us going to them and surveying them isn't necessarily the most conducive way to get that true information. So when we worked with the Indigenous Center, we would do office hours in the Indigenous Center. So when students came in, we would have coffee chats with them so that it was in their space where they felt they belonged, where they were comforted and supported, rather than us sending an email or having a booth out on Main Street, something like that. Is we got to realize that there's a reason they're not coming. And part of that is they may not feel like they belong. So if we try to just inundate them with surveys and try to get that data, we may not get authentic data because it's not conducive to potentially language that they're used to, in a format that they're used to, and they may not be comfortable, and so they're just giving you answers of what they think we want to hear.
Yeah, that's a good note. For us at UNC Charlotte, we had a little issue with the participation in fraternity sorority life in regards to intramurals. So what we've been doing is actually going directly to their chapter meetings and directly to organization meetings, and figuring out, what's why maybe they've lost interest, why maybe they not seeing, intramurals, which traditionally normally is traditionally is participated by fraternity sorority life. What tools or what methods we can get them into participating more in these leagues and tournaments, and whether it is incentivizing it again, which is a common thing across institutions, but what other things we could put into it in terms of in which we use qualitative data, what more we can add to it to get and generate more interest and participation into intramurals.
Ooh, Michelle's bringing up a really good point about survey fatigue here. Oh, sorry. Jump in.
I was just going to quickly provide an example. Last year at Windsor, we created the first ever cricket league with intramurals, and that was simply through sending an email to the Indian Student Association, sitting down with them, finding out why they don't participate in intramurals currently. Then we opened up a league, and it hit max capacity in its first year running. We also hired a student from that association itself to be the league convener and a referee and that sort of stuff. So we completely got a new segment of students that we were trying to reach just by reaching out to them and kind of being that first step, rather than sending surveys and you know, trying to convolute things that way. It was just, you know, let's have a coffee, let's have a conversation, and let's see if we can get something going for you.
And that's awesome. I got to jump in on that because I had the same experience trying to do a cricket league where I got some students that were interested, and I tried to fit the cricket league into a format of our current intramurals. We did registration and nobody registered. I think one team registered. So we sat down with the group and the student leaders, and again, they were from, you know, there's from the Indian Student Association and Pakistan student, different varieties. And we realized that the way the students wanted to participate wasn't conducive to the intramural structure. And so they actually created a social club, and they just needed support from us in space and equipment and little things to get them running. And they ended up being like a 550 student club where they had a competitive team that would travel around from university. This was at University of Waterloo. And so they would, and then they started doing mini cups. They had their own tournaments that they would run. They would invite the rec staff to come and commentate and have fun. And so again, our structures weren't fitting what they needed. And sometimes we just need to support and get out of the way. But that's a key point, is having that conversation with them. It's what is it you actually need, and how do we facilitate that?
Yeah, and I think with that, what was also really important was before we started up the league, we actually walked around with a few of the students in the gymnasium, and we said, okay, like what happens if the ball hits this place? And they're like, oh, well, we'll make that 6 points. Then if the ball hits over here, it's an automatic 2 points, like into the bleachers and the stands and stuff like that. So they really were able to shape the game and the rules the way they wanted to. And then what was really cool was it was a few weeks into the league, I dropped in one day, and they were actually filming and going live with video. I don't know where it was going to, but they had an iPhone right behind the batter. Or I guess it's probably not called a batter in cricket, but they had an iPhone that was live streaming it to somewhere back home with their families and stuff, which was really cool.
So you've seen more participation with them and engaging with them with the rule settings, and you've allowed them to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like if we didn't want students running into the bleachers to play a ball, right? So we kind of said, okay, this is a safety issue here, but so you guys can't go and make this a playable ball, but what do you guys want the rule to be? So it's very consultative in terms of how we were setting up the rules and the systems to be in place. And then just kind of checking in on a regular basis to making sure that they are sticking to these. I think that a few years ago at Windsor, there was an attempt to create a cricket league, and there was issues with them using like improper equipment and things breaking in the gym, but this time that they were much better receptive to saying, okay, these are the rules. If they aren't followed, then unfortunately we're gonna have to cancel it out. Yeah,
that's great. Is that something, you know, and before we last bit, is that something y'all see moving forward in engaging other populations, is engaging with them on what rules to make it more comfortable for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that whenever you're going to bring a game into a space that it's not regularly played in, and you're not necessarily the expert, you have to bring in some people who understand the game a little bit better and kind of generate the rules. I know when we originally were talking about the bleacher stuff, I was actually thinking back from my days at Brock University where we did soccer, baseball in the gym. And again, like if it went into the bleachers, it was a ground rule double and that sort of stuff. And so that's kind of where some of those ideas started to get generated from. And then we just kind of had to guide the conversation to where, you know, they were making up the rules themselves, but in a safe way.
That's perfect. Thank you. All right. We're short on time. but this is actually the last one that we got. So it's tracking participants from year one to matriculation in regards to, of course, not only improving ourselves, but how effective we are in terms of student success. So I'll open it up out there, but in answering this question that we got, that's something actually we're doing right now at UNC Charlotte. We are currently in a research study with our library team in which they are tracking the data that's been received from all across the institution, from the Career Center to high impact practices, to literally SGA, to us, to anyone that tracks data or numbers for students. And they've compiled it into certain metrics, certain things they're looking out for, and then of course they've used that in relation to their GPA retention and afterwards their graduation. And what's been interesting actually that we just received, and I shared it to my director, from year one of matriculation, it shows that the more students are actually engaged academically and student service wise, and in relation to that is, and especially, and they actually have it in numeric form from one engagement to as much as 10, the better the GPA is in a huge way, very significant difference. And one of the things that's interesting is now we've seen it in Tableau. We've actually had access to it from institution research, is that we're seeing a huge jump in participation in UREC, especially with Pell Grant and underserved minorities, which is heavily our population. So it's something that we're watching now. This study has been going on for 7 years, and we're in our second year with regards to that, but it's showing definitely great information in terms of that research and what we'd be able to get out of that. So, but that's for us. And I'll open up quickly, since we're short on time, if anybody has anything to add to it. Okay, well, if you do have any more questions on regards to this topic, you can feel free to reach out to either Jason or Ruben in regards to that information. They can forward that more information to you from someone, either committee or someone at headquarters. So that is actually everything we talked. That's all our topics for today. We're short on time, but I'd like to thank you all for participating, and especially to both Jason's and their, as well as everyone else who's contributed. This was a great discussion. Definitely exceeded my expectations in regards to collaboration and what we're doing with assessment. But yeah, that is all. I'll leave it, Jason. Either Jason, do you have anything to add before we're gone?
No, thanks everyone. Stay safe out there and stay up.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah. And again, thank you. And thank you all to NIRSA for hosting this and providing this opportunity for us to get together. So thank you all, and stay safe and have a good day.